The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, sealed with an insignia I hadn't seen in years. It bore the crest of the state prosecutor's office, a place I had walked away from 2 decades ago, hoping never to return. Yet, as I held that envelope in my aging hands, a quiet tremor passed through me, the kind that stirs ghosts long buried beneath years of silence. Edgar Stanton sat by the window of his old brick townhouse, the rain beginning to trace its way down the glass. At 67, his once steady hands now trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. He wore his usual navy wool coat over a white shirt and dark vest, his glasses resting low on the bridge of his nose as he examined the letter again, trying to make sense of the words that refused to change no matter how long he stared. Outside, the streets of Gatefield Hill shimmered with wet asphalt, the morning fog folding itself around the trees like gauze. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang slow, deliberate, like a reminder that time had not stopped, even if he sometimes wished it had. He unfolded the letter. It was short, a request from the city's legal counsel to appear at a property review hearing his own property. The line that struck him hardest came near the end. Subject of inquiry: contested ownership and guardianship of the Stanton estate. He read it again, slower this time, then once more, out loud, as if his voice might convince him it wasn't real. Someone was contesting his house. He placed the letter on the desk, beside an old photograph, his daughter, Lucia Devereux, smiling in front of the same house 20 years ago. Her auburn hair shimmered in the sun, and her eyes carried the kind of warmth he had never known how to keep safe. The thought that she might somehow be connected to this, no, he couldn't allow it. Yet his instincts, sharpened by years as a prosecutor, whispered otherwise. He rose from the chair, walked to the mirror by the hall, and stared at himself. The reflection that met him was both familiar and, for a man with silver hair, steady eyes, and a lifetime's worth of exhaustion behind them. The rain behind him thickened, and the sound of thunder rolled across the distant hill. He took his coat, stepped outside, and locked the door behind him. The air smelled of iron and wet stone, heavy with memory. He walked past the gate, past the old maple tree that still leaned toward the driveway, and onto the road that led down into the city. His shoes sank into puddles that reflected the gray sky above, and each step carried the echo of resolve. That as he approached the courthouse later that morning, he noticed a familiar figure waiting under the awning. Olivia Hadley, late 30s, dark hair in a low bun, gray blazer, immaculate even in the drizzle. Her sharp, composed face softened when she saw him. "You look exactly the same," she said, offering a small smile, "except maybe the eyes. They've seen more storms." "And you," Edgar replied, his tone calm but weary. "Still saving old men from themselves, only the ones who deserve saving." They stepped inside together, the marble floor glistening beneath their shoes. Olivia handed him a folder neatly bound, labeled Case 411B, Stanton vs. Carver Holdings. The name sent a quiet shiver down his spine. "Carver," he muttered. "Evan Carver." Olivia nodded. "Your daughter's husband, or ex-husband, technically. He filed the claim 2 weeks ago." Edgar exhaled slowly, staring at the papers. The edges were crisp, the ink still fresh, but the betrayal it contained was old and familiar. He could already see the strategy in Evan's move: attack from within, through family and legality both. It was the kind of thing only a man who understood power from the inside would attempt. Outside, thunder rolled again. Back at the Gatefield estate, the rain had deepened into a steady curtain. Lucia Devereux sat in her parked car across the driveway, her auburn hair damp from the storm. She held her phone tightly, her thumb hovering above a number she hadn't called in years, her father's. But before she could press it, a second call flashed across her screen. Evan Carver. Her pulse quickened. "Don't go to him." Evan's voice came through the line, calm but sharp. "He'll twist everything. You know how he is. I just want to understand why." "Evan," she whispered. "You already do," he replied. "You just don't want to admit it." The line went dead. Lucia stared out the windshield, rain blurring her reflection. The house loomed ahead, familiar, imposing, drenched in gray. Every window seemed to watch her, as if the walls themselves remembered her guilt. Inside, Edgar poured himself a cup of tea, hands steady now. The taste was bitter, grounding. He stood by the window and watched the rain streak down the glass. The sky outside split by lightning. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure at the edge of the driveway, half concealed by the downpour. Lucia, but by the time he blinked, she was gone. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and whispered to no one in particular. The past has a way of finding its way home. Night settled quietly over Gatefield Hill, the rain tapering to a mist that glimmered under the porchlight. Inside the old Stanton house hummed with its familiar silence, the kind that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Edgar Stanton stood in the center of his study, the one room that had always belonged entirely to him. The desk, the shelves, the faded map of the city he once fought to protect, all still in their places, as though time itself had learned obedience here. The faint whir of the security monitor filled the room, showing black and white feeds from around the property. He watched them one by one: the gate, the garage, the narrow path that led to the steel vault beneath the eastern wing. For most people, it was just a reinforced cellar. But for Edgar, it was the one sanctuary that mattered. Every document, every recording, every truth that had once saved or damned a case in his life now slept down there, sealed away behind 6 inches of tempered steel. He placed his glasses down, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The tea on his desk had gone cold. He didn't bother reheating it. From the hallway, the sound of approaching footsteps, slow, hesitant. He turned, his hand brushing the edge of the desk instinctively. The door opened a fraction, and Olivia Hadley appeared, her grey blazer catching a trace of lamplight. "I let myself in," she said quietly, setting down a folder. "You weren't answering calls. I wasn't in the mood for talking." She nodded, walking closer. Her posture remained professional, but there was a softness in her eyes, the kind reserved for people who had already lost too much. "The Carver Holdings motion has been advanced. The hearing is in 3 days." Edgar sighed. "That's sooner than expected." "Evan's playing fast. He knows you're outnumbered." He looked at her, steady but tired. Numbers were never what decided cases. "Olivia, only proof." She studied him for a moment. "And you still have proof?" He gestured toward the security feeds, the steel vault visible on one of the monitors. "Everything that matters is in there." Olivia exhaled through her nose, folding her arms. "You've kept that vault sealed since the day Lucia left." He didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that the rain outside became audible again. Finally, she said, "You think she'll show up, don't you?" Edgar looked toward the window. "She already has." Olivia followed his gaze but saw nothing, only the dark, silver-tinged shapes of the trees swaying beyond the glass. She glanced back at him, reading the fatigue etched between his words. "Don't reopen old wounds for the sake of justice," she murmured. "There's no difference anymore," he replied. Hours later, after Olivia left, Edgar descended the staircase to the lower level. The air down there was colder, sharper, the scent of metal and dust clinging to every surface. He reached the steel door of the vault, ran his fingers across the keypad, and entered a code so old his hands seemed to remember it on their own. A soft click, the door opened. Inside, the room was simple, shelves lined with binders and drives, a filing cabinet sealed with 2 separate locks, and a single light bulb humming faintly overhead. He stepped inside, the sound of his shoes echoing off the concrete. On one of the shelves, a folder bore the name Carver Holdings Acquisition, 2019. He pulled it free, flipping through documents until a single page caught his attention. A notarized contract bearing a signature he had seen before, too familiar to mistake. Lucia de Vere. He traced his finger across the ink, his chest tightening. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the precision, the way each letter matched her real handwriting. Almost. He sat down at the small metal table in the corner, turned on the desk lamp, and took out a magnifying glass. Even in his old age, his eye for detail hadn't dulled. There a deviation in the loop of her L, a break where her pen normally pressed firm. It wasn't her, it was someone who wanted him to believe it was, and only one man would know how to forge that well. Evan Carver. He returned upstairs, the folder under his arm. The house felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves understood what he had uncovered. He stopped at the window and looked out again. The night so still that even the rain had grown silent. A movement caught his eye, a figure crossing the yard. Not Lucia this time, this one taller, broader. The gait was deliberate, military. Almost. Edgar turned off the lights and moved quietly to the study door, reaching for the old revolver in the drawer. The floor creaked once beneath his foot. Then a knock, soft, measured, unhurried. He waited. A voice came through the wood, low but steady. "It's Detective Holt." Edgar hesitated, then opened the door. Raymond Holt stood there, trenchcoat damp from rain, his expression unreadable. He carried a manila envelope under one arm. "Evening, sir. I was told you wanted to see me." "I did," Edgar said, stepping aside. "Come in." Holt entered, setting the envelope down. "Economic Crimes got your message. Said you had something worth revisiting." Edgar opened the folder on the desk, sliding out the page with Lucia's forged signature. "Worth revisiting," he repeated quietly. "Try fraudulent." The detective studied the page, his brow furrowing. "That's a clean job. High-end replication." "Too clean," Edgar replied. "He knew I'd see it. He wanted me to." Holt looked up. "Evan Carver." Edgar nodded. The detective leaned back, crossing his arms. "You think he's setting up leverage before the hearing?" "I think," Edgar said, eyes dark with certainty, "he's already started." The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, before thunder rolled again outside. The rain returned, harder this time. Holt gathered the papers and slid them into a new evidence sleeve. "I'll need to log these officially. That means chain of custody." Edgar nodded. "Do it quietly. No records that tie it back to this house." "You planning something?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked once more at the monitors. The screen showing the vault now displayed static, faint, erratic, like interference. Something had been down there. When Holt left, Edgar remained in the study, staring at the screen. His reflection ghosted faintly across the glass, merging with the flickering snow of static dots somewhere beneath the floor, behind layers of steel and memory. His sanctuary was no longer untouched. The house had begun to remember. The morning came with a pale light that stretched thinly across the hills. The storm had passed, but the ground outside the Stanton house was still slick with memory rainwater, glimmering like glass over the stones. Inside, Edgar Stanton sat at his desk, the same desk that had outlasted 3 decades of his life and countless trials. His reflection in the monitor glass looked older than he remembered, the faint hum of the security system marking time like a metronome. He scrolled through the latest footage, each frame a window into a silent world. The gate, the driveway, the hallway outside the vault, all quiet, all ordinary, yet Edgar's instincts the same that had once made him a formidable prosecutor knew. The stillness was the most deceptive form of movement. He reached for his notebook, opening to a clean page. The words came slowly, deliberate. Operation Sanctuary, internal investigation, day 1. He paused, letting the ink settle before continuing. Objective, verify breach, identify source, contain quietly. A knock interrupted his thoughts. He looked up, expecting Olivia, but the voice that followed was softer, younger, uncertain. "Dad." Lucia DeVere stood in the doorway, her auburn hair damp, her hazel eyes shadowed with guilt and exhaustion. She looked smaller somehow, as if the years since she'd left had hollowed something out of her. She clutched the strap of her bag like an anchor. Edgar rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here." "I know," she said, "but I had to." The silence that followed carried years of unsaid words. Rainwater still clung to her coat, dripping onto the floor between them. She took a hesitant step forward. "I didn't sign anything, Dad. Not that contract. Not ever." He studied her face, searching for the truth he already wanted to believe. "Then who did?" Her voice trembled. "Evan. He said it was just for paperwork, just something to help pay off his debts. I didn't know until she broke off," swallowing hard. "Until it was too late." Edgar turned away, his jaw tightening. He walked to the window, hands behind his back, the faint tremor in his fingers returning. "You married a man who sees people as transactions. Every promise, every smile, it's all currency to him." She lowered her head. "I know that now." When he turned back, his gaze was sharp again. "Then you also know what he's after." She nodded. The vault, downstairs, the old generator clicked on a low, mechanical heartbeat beneath the house. Edgar led Lucia through the hallway, the air thick with the scent of steel and oil. When the vault door came into view, her breath caught. She had forgotten how imposing it was, the thick brushed metal, the faint hum of electronic locks. "This is where you kept everything?" she asked. "Everything that matters," Edgar said. He keyed in the first code. The lights flickered once before the inner mechanism clicked open. As the heavy door swung outward, the fluorescent bulb above them buzzed to life, illuminating the shelves inside documents, drives, and thick binders labeled by year and case number. Lucia stepped closer, scanning the rows. You never stopped working. I never stopped watching, he corrected. She ran her fingers across the spines of old files. How many people did you put away with all this? Enough to know some of them never really stayed there. In the study above, Olivia Hadley sat before the same monitors, the screens cycling through feeds from around the estate. Her phone buzzed. Incoming message from the courthouse. Asterisk Carver motion advanced to pretrial review. 24 hours notice. Asterisk she frowned, immediately dialing Edgar's number. No answer. Her eyes shifted to the feed, showing the vault stairwell. The camera flickered once, then again. Static. She grabbed her coat. Below, Edgar placed the forged contract on the table beneath the vaults. Single light. Lucia stood behind him, arms folded tightly as though to keep herself from shaking. He turned on a small lamp and handed her a magnifying glass. Look closely, he said. She leaned in, studying the signature under the light. At first, it looked perfect, every curve, every pressure mark. But then, just as he had seen, she noticed it. The tiny break in the L, the pen, hesitation near the E. That's not mine, she whispered. No, Edgar said, voice steady. But it was meant to look like it was. Lucia looked at him, fear replacing guilt. He's framing me. He's not framing you, Edgar replied. He's framing me through you. Her eyes widened. He thinks you'll protect me. He's counting on it. A sharp creak echoed from the stairwell above. Lucia froze. Edgar's eyes flicked toward the door. Stay here, he said, already moving. He climbed the steps silently, his hand brushing the wall where the revolver hung in its old holster. As he reached the top, Olivia burst through the front door, rain splashing behind her. Edgar, she said, breathless. He's coming, She nodded. He's on his way. Filed a motion, made sure it leaked. You'll be served by nightfall. Edgar's expression didn't change. Then he's already done what he came to do. He moved past her, checking the monitors. Every camera feed was back except one. The vault. The screen displayed nothing but static. Olivia followed his gaze. You think he's inside? He shook his head slowly. No, he doesn't need to be. He's already taken what he wants. Her brow furrowed. Then what was in there? He looked at her, the weight of 2 decades in his eyes. The one thing that proves I ever existed. Outside, headlights cut through the mist as a car pulled into the driveway. Evan Carver stepped out, his charcoal suit catching the glow from the porch light. He straightened his jacket, checked his reflection in the car window, and smiled slow, calculated, confident. Inside, Edgar turned off the monitors. Stay behind me, he said to Olivia. In the vault below, Lucia waited in silence, the hum of the generator pulsing like a heartbeat. She looked at the documents spread across the table, at the evidence of lives entangled in lies, and whispered to herself, you wanted a sanctuary, Dad, but maybe it's already gone. And above her, thunder rolled again. The sound of the rain had faded, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against the walls of the Stanton house. Outside, the headlights of Evan Carver's car cut across the drive, their pale beams slicing through the mist like so. Inside, the air was thick with waiting, a fragile, suspended moment between confrontation and collapse. Edgar Stanton stood at the top of the stairs, watching through the narrow pane of the front window as Evan approached. The younger man moved with the same calculated precision Edgar remembered from their last meeting years ago. The stride of someone who believed control was a birthright. He carried no umbrella, no briefcase, only a small envelope in his hand. That was enough. Behind Edgar, Olivia Hadley's voice broke the silence. You don't have to face him alone. He didn't turn. I do. He's not here to talk. He's here to end something. Her tone softened. You think he'll come in peace? I think he'll come prepared. The knock came exactly 3 seconds later, firm, even measured, the rhythm of someone who knew the door would open. Edgar did not hesitate. He unlocked the latch and pulled it open. Evan Carver stood framed in the doorway. Mid-40s, sharp-featured, handsome in a way that owed more to arrogance than grace. His tailored grey suit was damp from the fog, but his expression was perfectly composed. Evening, Edgar, he said, voice smooth as polished glass. You look well. He came sooner than expected. Evan smiled faintly. You always said punctuality was a virtue. Edgar stepped aside, gesturing him in. Let's not pretend this is a social call. Evan crossed the threshold, eyes glancing around the familiar interior, the photographs, the antique furniture, the faint scent of old books and rain. You've kept it the same, he said, nostalgic. I prefer unchanged, Edgar replied. Olivia appeared from the hall, arms folded. If you're here to serve papers, do it and leave. Evan turned his head, his smile polite but dismissive. Ms. Hadley, always the loyal advisor. You must be exhausted cleaning up after him. I clean up the truth, she said coldly. Evan's eyes flicked back to Edgar. Shall we get to business? They moved into the study. The monitors hummed quietly, one still flickering with static. Evan placed the envelope on the desk and tapped it once. Notice of motion, filed this morning. You're officially being investigated for concealment of evidence in the Carver Holdings case. Edgar met his gaze, unflinching. You forged her signature. Evan's smile didn't falter. You'll need more than accusations, old man. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. You think you can bury the past in that vault of yours? You think justice still bends for men like you? Times have changed. You don't own truth anymore. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the clock filled the space, ticking softly in the tension dot. Then Edgar said quietly, you underestimate what truth can survive. Evan tilted his head. You mean your daughter? The room went still. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. Edgar didn't move, but something cold flickered behind his gaze. Evan continued, voice low, almost sympathetic. She's in over her head, Edgar. She signed things she shouldn't have. She got involved in transactions she doesn't even understand. You could save her, maybe, if you gave up the documents in that vault. She didn't sign anything, Edgar said evenly. Evan smiled. You sound sure. I am. Then I suppose you won't mind if I subpoena her next. Olivia stepped forward, her voice sharp. You touch her name, Carver, and I'll see to it. Edgar raised a hand, stopping her. No, Olivia, let him talk. Evan leaned back, smirking. You always did have a flair for restraint. It's what made you such a good prosecutor and such a terrible father. The words landed like a blow, quiet but absolute. Edgar didn't flinch. He only reached into the drawer of his desk and placed something on the table, the same forged contract, sealed now in a clear plastic sleeve. You forgot to take this back, he said. Evan's expression twitched for the first time. A fraction. That's not. It's yours, Edgar interrupted. Your mistake. The pen pressure, the inconsistency in the loop of the L. You're good, Evan, but not perfect. Evan's jaw tightened. That won't hold in court. It doesn't need to, Edgar said softly. It only needs to hold in memory. Downstairs, Lucia de Vere stood near the vault, listening to the muffled voices above. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. She could hear her father's tone, calm, deliberate, but each word like a blade pressed against glass. Then, Evan's voice, cold and calculated. And through it all, she felt the ache of recognition to men who had shaped her world in opposite directions. Finally colliding in the same room, she turned toward the open vault door. Inside, the shelves loomed like silent witnesses. Her eyes caught on one folder labeled Sanctuary Protocol, Private. She hesitated, then reached for it. The first page bore her father's handwriting. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means I no longer trust the system to protect what matters. Asterisk, she turned the page, scanning quickly. Asterisk, the vault is not only evidence, it's a failsafe. Every case, every betrayal, every compromise recorded and encoded. Operation Sanctuary was built to expose corruption if the law refused to. Asterisk, Lucia froze. He hadn't built a vault to hide from justice. He'd built it to preserve it. Upstairs, Evan gathered the envelope again, forcing composure. You think this will save you? He asked. Edgar met his eyes. It already has. Evan's smile returned, colder now. You've always loved your metaphors, but this isn't a courtroom anymore. This is survival. He turned toward the door, pausing at the threshold. You won't stop me. Edgar's voice followed him, calm and final. I already have. Evan stopped, halfway through the doorway, something flickering in his expression. Confusion. Maybe. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen. His face changed. He turned back, toward Edgar. What did you do? Edgar said nothing. Olivia's phone buzzed next. She looked down an anonymous message. Asterisk vault data transfer initiated. Operation Sanctuary active. Asterisk. Her eyes darted up. Edgar, what's happening? He looked past her, out the window, where the sky had turned the color of metal before dawn. The truth, he said, voice quiet but resolute. It's finally moving, and somewhere beneath their feet, deep within the vault, The old generator roared to life. The following morning broke without sunlight, a grey, uncertain dawn that felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. The Stanton house stood silent against the mist, its windows reflecting nothing. Inside, the faint hum of electronics still lingered in the air, a ghostly echo of what had awakened the night before. Operation Sanctuary had begun. Edgar Stanton sat in his study, the glow of his laptop casting pale light across his face. The data transfer was complete. Decades of files, evidence, and recorded testimonies archived, duplicated, and encrypted into a network that stretched far beyond his control. It was irreversible now. The system he had built in secrecy had been triggered automatically the moment Evan Carver left the house. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of it all. Not relief, not pride, but inevitability. For the first time in years, Edgar was no longer holding anything back. The truth was loose. Downstairs, Lucia DeVere moved through the vault like someone walking through a church after the sermon was done. The screens embedded into the concrete walls flickered with fragments of case numbers, courtroom transcripts, confidential memos, the ghosts of Edgar's career, all illuminated in quiet defiance of time. She reached out and touched one of the monitors, the scrolling text reflecting in her eyes. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling, "you released everything." From upstairs, his voice came through the intercom. Not everything, only what the world needed to remember. Her throat tightened. And what about what it needs to forget? There was no answer, only static. Across the city, the courthouse was already waking to chaos. Screens in the press room filled with anonymous data leaks. Files tagged Operation Sanctuary appeared in synchronized bursts. Government contracts, suppressed investigations, evidence of bribery, and names that once seemed untouchable. The timestamps traced back to Edgar Stanton's old credentials. Within hours, the world knew his name again. Evan Carver was sitting in his office when the first alert appeared on his phone. He opened it, his eyes narrowing as line after line of classified information poured across the screen. His own name among them. Bank transfers, offshore ledgers, fabricated documents, a trail to clean, too damning to dismiss. He rose from his chair, pacing. "Damn you, Edgar," he muttered. He reached for his phone and dialed, but the call went straight to voicemail. "You think this makes you righteous," he said into the silence. "You just detonated your own legacy." When the line cut, he threw the phone against the wall. Back at the Stanton estate, Olivia Hadley arrived just after sunrise. She found Edgar still in the study, staring at the static on the vault feed. His tea sat untouched beside him, gone cold. "What did you do?" she asked, breathless. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What I was supposed to do. You leaked the files," she said, disbelief and awe mixing in her tone. "All of them, enough to burn down what shouldn't have survived." She shook her head, pacing. "You realize what this means? You've implicated half the judiciary. There'll be investigations, indictments, retaliation, I'm aware." "Then why now?" He exhaled slowly. "Because truth doesn't belong in a vault. And because I'm running out of time to tell it." Olivia's voice softened. "You could have chosen peace. There's no peace built on silence." Lucia climbed the stairs from the vault, her steps hesitant. When she appeared in the doorway, both Edgar and Olivia turned. Her eyes were red, but her face was steady. "I saw everything," she said. "Your files, your recordings, all those names you never stopped collecting." "I couldn't," Edgar said quietly. "Even after Mum, after me. You still thought justice was worth losing everything for." He hesitated. "I didn't lose you, Lucia. You left." Her jaw tightened. "Because you made this house into a prison of evidence." The words hit him harder than he let show. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once held hers when she was a child, when the world was simpler. "Maybe," he said softly, "but even prisons can keep monsters out." Lucia's voice wavered. "And what if you became one of them?" For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain returning against the windows. Olivia glanced between them, her throat tight with the kind of silence that could only exist between family. "Lucia," she said gently, "you need to understand." But Lucia shook her head. "No, he doesn't need defending." She turned to leave, then stopped. "You always told me truth mattered more than comfort. Maybe you were right, but you never warned me how much it hurts." Then she walked out. Edgar didn't stop her. By midday, the world outside had begun to turn. News channels blared his name, his image, his history, half hero, half criminal. The man who built a machine to judge the judges. Some called him a patriot, others called him dangerous. Both were right. Olivia remained by his side as the day unfolded. She read statements aloud, sifted through reports, fielded calls he wouldn't take. Through it all, Edgar sat in silence, watching the rain blur the world beyond the glass. Finally, she said, "You understand what happens next?" He nodded. "They'll come. They'll take everything. They already did." She watched him carefully. "Do you regret it?" His eyes drifted toward the old photograph on the wall. Lucia as a child, sunlight on her hair, laughing beside the gate. "Regret isn't the right word," he said, "but I do remember." That night, the storm returned with force. Thunder shook the valley, and the lights in the Stanton house flickered once. Then again, Edgar sat alone in the dark, listening to the rain drum against the windows. The generator hummed faintly below, the only sound of persistence left. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "Sanctuary isn't a place, it's the cost of remembering." Outside, headlights appeared once more in the drive. A car door opened, then footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the front porch. Olivia rose from the couch, moving to the window, her face tensed. "It's him," she said. Edgar didn't ask who. The knock came, 3 times, the same rhythm as before. He stood, the years settling heavily on his shoulders, and walked toward the door. When he opened it, the man standing there wasn't Evan Carver, it was Detective Raymond Holt. The rain dripped from the brim of his coat, pooling at his boots. He looked up, eyes somber but resolute. "Mr. Stanton," he said, holding out a document. "There's a warrant." Edgar nodded slowly. "I was expecting it." Holt hesitated. "You should know, off record, some of us think you did the right thing." Edgar gave a faint, tired smile. Right and wrong stopped being opposites a long time ago. He reached for his coat, straightening it one last time, and followed Holt out into the storm. Behind him, the house stood silent, the lights flickering, the vault still humming below, its data still whispering through invisible networks across the world. The sanctuary was no longer hidden, it had become the storm. The city awoke in a storm of voices. By morning, news networks had already turned Edgar Stanton's name into a global headline. Analysts called it the most comprehensive whistleblower leak in modern history. Politicians called it sabotage. Former allies called it betrayal. But Edgar, sitting in the interrogation room of the State Bureau, called it something else entirely. Justice delayed. The room was sterile, a square of steel and glass. Rain streaked the window, turning the city lights into liquid color. Across from him sat Detective Raymond Holt. His trench coat hung neatly on the chair beside him. Between them, a recorder blinked red. "You understand why you're here?" Holt said quietly. Edgar nodded. "To answer questions no one actually wants the answers to." Holt allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "They're saying your system accessed classified records, bypassed judiciary firewalls, that you exposed confidential evidence." "I exposed truth," Edgar corrected. "Confidentiality was just its disguise." He leaned back, the chair creaking slightly. "You ever wonder why we build vaults, Detective? To protect what we love or to hide what we've done?" Holt looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe both." Edgar's gaze shifted toward the window. Outside, thunder rolled. "Then I built the wrong kind." At that same moment, across the city, Olivia Hadley sat in her car outside the courthouse. The rain on her windshield distorted everything: people, lights, time itself. Her phone buzzed with notifications she refused to read. Statements, interviews, legal orders. The world was turning, and she could barely keep up. She opened her laptop, hesitating before typing Operation Sanctuary. Full disclosure. Her screen filled with archives of Edgar's work cases from decades ago. Notes in his handwriting, evidence that had never seen daylight. It was all there, meticulous, painful, irrefutable. She whispered to herself, "You didn't just expose them, Edgar, you exposed us all." Meanwhile, Lucia DeVere sat alone in a motel off the highway. The news played on the television, her father's face frozen mid-sentence on the screen. She muted the volume, unable to listen. The world had turned her father into a mythogene, a man between savior and sinner, saint and criminal, the same way it had done when she was a child. Waiting for him to come home from court, she opened the envelope she had taken from the vault before leaving. Inside, only one photograph, her mother standing with Edgar in front of the courthouse decades ago. They were younger then, untouched by what they would lose. On the back of the photo, written in his hand, Asterisk truth doesn't destroy us. It only shows what was already broken. Asterisk Lucia pressed the photo to her chest, tears she didn't want slipping down her face. In the bureau's interrogation room, Holt pressed the stop button on the recorder. That's enough for today, he said quietly. Edgar didn't move. What happens now? Officially, you'll be charged under Article 7 of the Data Integrity Act. And unofficially, Holt studied him for a long moment before answering. Unofficially, there's an emergency session at the courthouse tonight. Half the people you exposed are trying to decide whether to destroy what's left or face what's coming. Which half do you think will win? Depends who gets there first. He slid a folder across the table. Your daughter's name came up. They'll subpoena her within 48 hours. Edgar's expression changed. Then I need to get to her before they do. Holt hesitated, then stood, lowering his voice. There's a back exit. No cameras. You didn't hear it from me. Edgar's eyes met his. You'll lose your badge for that. Maybe, Holt said, but I'd rather lose that than my conscience. The storm outside hadn't stopped. Sheets of rain chased Edgar through the city streets as he left the bureau. His coat clung to his shoulders, the pavement gleaming under streetlights. He moved like a man with purpose, not fear. Every drop of rain carried the echo of something old, something like absolution. By the time he reached the motel, dawn was breaking through the clouds. He knocked softly on the door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then it opened. Lucia stood there, eyes red, hair loose around her face. She froze when she saw him. Dad, he exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and apology. You shouldn't have stayed here. I didn't know where else to go. He stepped inside. The room was small, 2 chairs, 1 bed, and a single lamp that flickered as though it, too, were tired of surviving. He sat down, his movements slow, deliberate. They'll come for you soon, he said. They'll use you to get to me. Lucia's voice was barely a whisper. You already gave them everything. Not everything, he said. Not you. She sat across from him. You always made it sound noble, truth, justice, sacrifice, but all it ever did was destroy the people closest to you. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Maybe that's the price of remembering. She shook her head. No, Dad, that's the excuse of a man who never learned to forgive himself. The words landed softly, but they cut deeper than any accusation. He didn't reply. The silence between them was heavier than thunder. Finally, she asked, was it worth it? He thought for a long moment. I don't know, he said honestly, but I couldn't live knowing what I buried. Lucia stood, walking toward the window. The storm had thinned, the clouds breaking apart to reveal the first trace of sunlight. Maybe, she said quietly, some truths are meant to be buried, just long enough for something better to grow. He turned toward her, seeing not the child he'd failed to protect, but the woman who had learned to carry her own fire. You sound like your mother. She smiled faintly. You finally remember her. Every day, he said softly. That's why I built the vault, to keep her voice alive. To keep yours. Lucia turned from the window. Then let it go, Dad. Let the world take it. You don't need to carry it anymore. Hours later, Olivia arrived at the motel. When she entered, she found Edgar alone, sitting on the edge of the bed, the morning light spilling across the floor. His coat was folded neatly beside him, his glasses resting on the nightstand. He's gone, Lucia said quietly from the doorway. He left before sunrise. Olivia nodded, her chest tightening. On the desk, Edgar had left a single page, handwritten and unsigned. Asterisk to those who built the vault. Remember that justice is not a structure. It's a mirror, and we are the cracks. Asterisk outside. The sun finally broke through the clouds, washing the city in pale gold. The storm had passed, but its scent lingered in the air, the faint, the electric smell of something cleansed and reborn. Lucia stepped into the light, her father's note still trembling in her hands. The words were final, but they didn't feel like an ending. They felt like a beginning, and somewhere far away, beneath the ruins of systems and lies, the world became painfully to remember. Epilogue. Weeks later, in a small town by the coast, a man sat at a cafe overlooking the sea. His hair was shorter now, his face thinner, his eyes quiet but alert. No one recognized him, and he preferred it that way. The papers still argued over what he had done, hero, traitor, or ghost. He didn't read them anymore. He lifted a cup of coffee to his lips. watching gulls trace white arcs against the horizon. The wind carried the faint hum of a distant radio-y reporter speaking his name again. He smiled faintly and turned the dial until the noise was gone. In his jacket pocket, a folded photograph remained. Lucia and her mother beneath a bright summer sun. For the first time in years, Edgar Stanton felt no need to remember, because the world finally had